Hello, thank you, and welcome to a conversation with Latino leaders about redistricting in Arizona. My name is Senia Orona. I am the Affirmative Action Moderator and outgoing chair of the Arizona Democratic Party Latinx Caucus. As the chair, it was my duty to lift up the voices of Latinx families and empower rising stars to step into their power and engage new voters. Through this work, and in partnership with community organizations throughout Arizona, we have connected rural communities in Yavapai and Navajo County to trainings and resources needed to uplift students and newly active voters. In partnership with the DNC, we have grown Mujeres Mobilize, a down-to-earth house meeting campaign, and engaged the powerful mujeres in our households towards the vote. These victories are a small piece of the long legacy and vast network of organizing that brought us success on the national level in 2020. I'm excited for the next decade of Latino political power in Arizona, and I am confident with the leadership in this room, we will continue toward just and equal representation at all levels of government in Arizona. Latinos are the fastest growing demographic group in Arizona. The rising leadership of the past 10 years has made it possible for us to flex our political muscles from the streets to the ballot box to elected office. People who don't want to see that muscle flexed see that power and will do anything they can to stop Latinos from representing our communities. They will do anything to stop us from demanding what's right for our families and will work hard to stop us from protecting our homes from extremism. Redistricting is one of the quiet fights that has monumental consequences on the representation of our communities. It is our duty to take every chance we get to defend our power and keep pushing for equal representation at all levels of government. Here to guide this conversation and to talk more about redistricting is your moderator and longtime Latino leader of change in Arizona, Luis Heredia. Luis Heredia represents the state of Arizona on the Democratic National Committee and is a senior staff member to Senator Mark Kelly. Luis is an Arizona native from the town of Somerton in Yuma County. He was elected to the Somerton Elementary School District Governing Board at the age of 24 and served for 8 years, including 4 as board president. Luis has spent his career working to elect progressive leaders here in Arizona. His leadership roles in political campaigns include campaign manager for Kate Gallego for Phoenix Mayor, campaign manager for Felicia Rodolini for Arizona Attorney General, and Arizona Democratic Party Executive Director. Please welcome through the chat or with reactions, Luis Heredia.
Gracias, Senia, and thank you for everyone for in joining us today and a lot of this really great conversation we're about to have. It is extremely important that we gather and just learn and then learn about ways we could move this conversation forward. I am a big believer in it is our job as leaders to not make things simplistic, but make things simple for people to understand and things for them to take action, because this is we are really placed in a role of learning, and our passion brings us to this this classroom. But it is our work that in imagination and the way that we work together that kind of helps us move our community forward with really complicated stuff. I mean, redistricting is one of those issues that is not understood by many, and it allows the powerful to manipulate data and manipulate circumstances to take power away from you. And so it is extremely important that we understand the rules of engagement, that we understand the consequences of decision making. And this is the reason why we bring together a great group of individuals that are going to share with us their experiences and their lessons about the topic and the importance of redistricting. I have the privilege to introducing our panelists, and we have with us an icon, a giant among many in the civil rights movement in Arizona, was born from the battles in the barrio in Phoenix, and it is really a great honor to call Danny Ortega a friend, but also a mentor of many. Danny has been practicing law in Arizona since 1977. His community involvement began during high school and continues to this day on a focus on educational reform, political empowerment, and the protection of human rights. Presently, being the owner and founder of Ortega Law Firm, Mr. Ortega has a long distinguished history of not only on professional work, but also public service to the community. Over the years, he has served in a number of boards and commissions dedicated and serving, improving the community through the Cesar Chavez Foundation, Chicanos por la Causa, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, MALDEF. Mr. Ortega is also a previous chair of the National Organization of Unidos US, formerly known as National Council of La Raza, that was born in Arizona. Mr. Ortega is also inducted into the Arizona Democratic Hall of Fame and is a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of Los Abogados. I'm going to do the introduction of all the panelists and allow them to share their introductions as well. With us today, we also have from Douglas, Arizona, Victoria Grijalva Ochoa moved to Phoenix to pursue her public service and public policy at Arizona State University. During her time at ASU, Victoria was involved with the Andrew Goodman Foundation Vote Everywhere program, where she worked to make civic engagement accessible to students. Victoria was previously worked on various political campaigns, including Raquel Terán for Arizona House of Representatives, January Contreras for Arizona Attorney General, and Mark Kelly for the U.S. Senate. Now Victoria is fighting as the fair representative for political districts in Arizona. We also have with us Montse Arredondo, an executive director of One Arizona, a coalition of community groups that focuses on nonpartisan Latino civic engagement. Ms. Arredondo became politically engaged in 2010 during the fight to stop SB 1070. It was the impact of this law on her community that gave her the push to fight for Arizona. That is for an Arizona and a better future for all generations. Now, 11 years later, Montse works to fight for immigrant rights, registering voters, increasing the minimum wage, and building political power for communities so they can determine their own future. And finally, I also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Steven Nuno, who is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Politics and International Affairs at Northern Arizona University. He is also the communications director and senior analyst at Latino Decisions, a research firm that specializes in understanding the political opinions and attitudes of Latinos. Dr. Nuno earned his PhD in political science at the University of California, Irvine, and for years was a weekly contributor to NBC News Latino. Dr. Nuno researches and explores the relationship with Latinos and the American political system. So I just went through the hardest part of this conversation, which is reading bios, but we have a great group of panelists that are also going to share with us why they're here today with us. So let me begin by introducing our panelists, and so they could take a couple, 2 minutes to introduce why they're here. So I'll start off with Mr. Ortega. You're muted.
I said, can you hear me now? Thank you, Luis. The first thing I have to learn is how to unmute myself, which is not typical of me. But anyway, I appreciate being here today. I would just like to add just briefly that I had the opportunity to be a part of the litigation against redistricting maps in the last 2 decades. I had the honor of representing Congressman Pastor in that litigation involving the redistricting panel. The other thing that I think it's important is that I've been involved in this redistricting process in many forms, walking the street, registering voters, all the way up to, being a part of the litigation process. But I think that what's most important is what we're going to cover today is the whole issue of pre-clearance and my experience with it and why it is we really lost a big, opportunity with the holding that unconstitutional.
Now I got to learn to unmute myself. Like we haven't been doing this for a long time, but let me just also give an opportunity for Victoria to introduce herself and why she's here today.
Thanks, Luis. I am the Redistricting Program Manager with the coalitions of One Arizona and Arizona Wins. And while I don't get to boast the long career that Mr. Ortega has, as I was in high school the last time that a redistricting cycle happened, I have had the incredible opportunity to just dive straight in and learn about what the commission does, how they operate, and why our communities need to be a part of this work. Having done political engagement work and civic engagement work for 5 years now, it's important to me that the next decade is easier for us to continue doing this work, and so that the fights aren't as incredibly difficult as they have been over the past 10 years. So I get to support all of the partners in One Arizona Coalition and the Arizona Wins Coalition in doing all of the work that they do on the day-to-day, and so that they have all of the resources they need to keep folks engaged in this process.
Thank you, Victoria. Next up is Monse.
I'm just over here Googling eyes to Victoria because we're so excited to have her at the table. Again, I'm Monse with the One Arizona Table. We're a coalition of 28 organizations across the state. And we started after the big SB 1070 fight with majority Latino-led organizations, and have since grown to a more diverse coalition that includes other communities of color. And we're excited to be a part of this for the first time as a coalition, not only bringing Latino groups to the forefront of this conversation, but other constituency groups that care about what this looks like and what this will mean for the next 10 years.
Thank you, Monse. And finally, allow Mr. Professor to give us a couple comments and introductions.
So Stephen Nuno, I've been involved mostly on the research end, looking at Latino political behavior. And as Mr. Ortega mentions, the pre-clearance, I was a part of the Amici team that had submitted Amici in that case, the Shelby case. And I remember working for NBC News at the time, kind of screaming from the mountaintop saying, we need to follow the impact that this is going to have on disenfranchising people of color. And the response is largely, well, what's Shelby? It's in Alabama. What does that have to do with us? And even today in 2020, really kind of tracking the systemic disenfranchisement of Latinos, and of which the census is, and we'll talk about that here. It has been part of that ever since I've been in academia, since the year 2000.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I think the most important thing, and it was kind of touched on this, was that this is going to be the first test after pre-clearance was eliminated. And so Arizona has always had to go through a much more strict process where the rule of the redistricting maps and the reasons why changes were made to the redistricting map had to go through a pre-clearance as described before. In 2020, this is going to be the first area in which we will not have the ability for the Department of Justice to review this. But, in the reforming language that we have been working in, Arizona is one of the few states that has an independent redistricting commission. The voters in 2000 voted to create the redistricting commission, and it was passed with a wide margin because people wanted to remove politics from the process. And that was how voters were educated on this ballot proposition. From del dicho al hecho hay mucho trecho in this, where what the voters voted for to what is actual reality sometimes is very different scenarios. But Proposition 106 was called an independent redistricting to draw fair and competitive congressional and legislative maps, and it established 6 state constitutional criteria that the maps must satisfy. They include equal protection, compactness, respect for communities of interest, and competitiveness. So my first question goes to Monse and Victoria. Your organizations are working to organize communities and voters to participate and provide testimony to the IRC process. Can you tell us about why it's important for Latinos in communities to engage in the redistricting process, and give us some insight on how you're planning to do so?
Well, much like any other political process, it's going to happen whether we're participating in it or not. And so it's important that we're there at the table, that the commission can't just ignore us, that they can't just move forward with whatever their process is and not have any insight or not have any feedback from Arizonans, and especially from the communities of color that, you know, have made Arizona what it is. So it's important for us that Latinos are aware of what the commission is doing and what they can be saying to the commission to make sure that the maps that come out are actually fair to us, that they actually represent us. So really it's just about the process is going to happen no matter what. So we should be able to be at the table. We should be able to engage the commission, and we should tell them exactly what we need out of these maps and how we need to be represented.
Monte?
You know, and I would say this is an opportunity for us as we've grown and developed as movement leaders and folks in governance and taking action and doing advocacy work alongside this civic engagement push that we are, you know, we've climbed the ladder now as organizations that we want to be involved, we want to bring our community along. So we as a coalition are re-granting to partners to have organizers that are focused on this and care about redistricting and can talk about it and share what it means. We also, as you know, Victoria is on our team and is becoming the expert on redistricting and bringing folks along as to when they need to participate. There's still a lot of expectations that we have of this commission to make it easier for folks to participate. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that is something that we're noticing, that this process is going to happen no matter what, and it needs to be more open, and it's not quite there yet.
Professor Nuno, we've seen some messaging from partisans that suggests that the creation of competitiveness and competitive districts is not compatible with the determinant and preservation of communities of interest, that both of them are in conflict with each other. But as the Arizona Democratic Party contends that the previous IRC was able to create both a number of competitive districts while still preserving the Voting Rights Act, but also conserving the protection of communities of interest and them maximizing their political power in these districts. What are your thoughts on this particular debate, and to what extent are those two criteria truly at odds or are compatible?
Well, you know, I mean, I think the first thing to realize is anything that threatens the disproportionate hold on power by white men, the Republican Party, is going to be argued as being incompatible with democracy, right? When we're talking about, say, even a place like Texas, that is 38% white, and the Republican Party essentially runs the legislature in Texas, they get 2 extra seats. They actually sort of didn't care if they lost that seat, because they knew that if they lost that seat, that was probably going to be a Latino seat they're going to lose anyways, right? Same thing with Arizona, right? You know, we had the opportunity to have more power in Congress as a state. We lost that opportunity because of disinterest in gaining power, because largely that gives the Republican Party an opportunity to cut at representation for Latinos and for Democrats. So I think this notion of competitiveness, I think one of the things that the Democrats have to look at is just how many Latinos in Arizona vote Democrat, but aren't registered as Democrat, right? And so when you're talking about 30% of the state, essentially the Democrats in Arizona are a third party. There's more people who are registered as other and registered as Republicans in Arizona. And the Democrats have to ask themselves, why is that so, that we don't get Latinos registering for Democrats, even though they're voting for Democrats? And I think that is, to me, one of the biggest issues that the Democratic Party has to listen to. And we have this opportunity because we have, even though pre-clearance has been gutted, we do have Merrick Garland in running our Justice Department, and essentially this gives us the opportunity to make every district in the United States a pre-clearance district, right? And so we have that, luckily, but it's really the Democrats have to listen to these folks who are trying to put pressure on the Democratic Party to represent them and listen to them throughout the process over the next several years, so that when Latinos say we're being disenfranchised, the Democratic Party has to respond to that and really represent the folks who are putting them in power in places like Texas and Arizona, in Colorado, et cetera, et cetera.
This is open for everyone to chime in here. What is the benefit, if any, of competitive districts for Latinos and in our communities on the issue of competitiveness? How do Latinos benefit from having competitive districts?
I think Latinos are often taken for granted when it comes to politics. It's either they will vote Democrat or they won't vote at all. And competitive districts give the community an actual opportunity to be heard, be seen, and to actually have them being addressed and engaged. Candidates are going to be forced to actually talk to the community, to actually see what the community needs, so that if their campaigns don't reflect that, they won't be elected, right? Competitive districts mean that you actually have to fight for the votes of the community members. And so Latinos will actually see themselves represented in these campaigns, will actually see the issues they care about in these campaigns. And I think that's a big plus for having competitive districts.
Luis, this is Danny, if I may. I think it's important on both sides to recognize that we have as many Democrats who don't want competitive districts as we have Republicans who don't want competitive districts. And so I think that competitiveness really puts the Latino community in a situation where it can exercise its vote other than just a primary. As you know, over 90% of all districts that are created, senators and state representatives get elected in the primary. They don't get elected in the general. And the damage that it does is just tremendous, because if we're going to build a culture of voting, we can't just do it in primaries. And if we're going to have credibility, we don't need Anglo Democrats say, if only the Latino community had gotten out to vote, we would have won. But at the end of the line, the reason why we don't get out to vote in the general is because we have nobody to choose from. They're all elected in the primary. And so you're dealing with a situation here where competitiveness is important, not only to choosing who we want to represent us, but to building a culture of voting in all elections, not one election.
Excellent point, Danny. And I think in redistricting as a whole, one lesson is that you have to look at the competitiveness of the 9 congressional districts as a whole as well, not at the detriment. When you look at protecting the Voting Rights Act in those districts where you have political power and the community to elect one of their own in that process. But there are also other districts that we have to, so it's not only one fight in one region, it's a fight for the future of the state. And the same goes with the 30 legislative maps that we have. It is not just all things to one district that is preserved as a partisan dominant party district, for example, that we got to look at all of them as they are all added together and look at the competitiveness in the chamber and some other things. That is what I've taken away from a couple of years of redistricting, that we really have to look at those competitive districts with the opportunity of how power is given to interests like Latinos in those districts that are being talked to about their importance and their role in determining not only who wins that district, but also to the majorities in both of the chambers and in the congressional at the congressional level. Anyone else would like to contribute to the conversation of competitive? We're going to move on to pre-clearance and the discussion about some of the rules that the maps still have to go through. So I'll move on. This is a 2-part question. This is the 3rd cycle that the Arizona Redistricting Commission will go through their process, but this is like as previously mentioned, this is the first time that our maps will not be subject to a scrutiny of the Department of Justice through the pre-clearance process that was established by the original Voting Rights Act. Mr. Ortega, this question goes to you directly. Can you give us a little bit of background on the impact of pre-clearance on maps?
Well, first of all, in very general terms, pre-clearance was simply a way to determine whether a change in voting, whether it be registering to vote, whether it be voting on day of election, all those things had to go through this test of whether it was discriminatory in any way, shape, or form against any particular group. So the pre-clearance that we used to get in the past was through the Department of Justice. If you moved a precinct poll, you had to have it pre-cleared. I mean, that's on any voting change whatsoever, because any voting change can take the direction of serving people or serving parties instead of serving the community. And if in one way or another it was discriminatory, it was not pre-cleared. In other words, you could not implement the change in the voting poll without the Department of Justice saying it was not discriminatory and pre-cleared it. Pre-clearance in the redistricting process is extremely important. Remember that there was a time, I'm probably the only guy in the group right now that can remember this, but there was a time when it was the legislature that did redistricting. And it was nothing but swapping, getting me elected first, okay? To the elected officials out there who participated in this, the bottom line is that there were more self-serving motives when the legislature used to put it together. On the other hand, pre-clearance was that leverage that we had against those folks serving their own personal interests or their political interests, whatever it was. And then came along the Redistricting Commission, and quite frankly, there was no greater leverage. There's nothing at all that compared to pre-clearance when it came to the Redistricting Commission putting its maps together. Quite frankly, I'll tell you that the Redistricting Commission has in fact been more accessible, has given us greater opportunity to participate, and given us a degree of leverage over redistricting that we really never had in the legislature. It was, swapping votes and swapping people and swapping lines in a way that was more political than serving the community. So redistricting 1 and pre-clearance 2 were huge weapons for our community in particular. When you talk about communities of interest, when you talk about the things that are equal protection, competitiveness, all those things were also measured by people who weren't drawing their own districts, okay? And clearly pre-clearance at all times was our most, depending on the administration that we had, okay? And who was at the Department of Justice, they're not immune from politics. Let's talk about that, okay? If we had a friendly administration for our community in particular, pre-clearance was a high mountain to climb. And so they had to negotiate with us. They had to sit down and talk to us about what served our best interests. Now, clearly, I'll continue to say this, we have our own issues within our own community and our own elected officials doing the same thing to some degree, but we were also protected against them with both redistricting and pre-clearance. And so when we lost that, we lost the biggest leverage we've had. So what do we do now? Since we don't have pre-clearance, we got to show up and we got to talk about communities of interest, and we got to talk about competitiveness. We cannot let politicians control this process, because if they do, it's like allowing the legislature to draw maps. And we have to make sure that the swapping that goes on is fair to our community. Look, I'm as interested in competitiveness as we talked about before, as I am in making sure that our people have the choice to elect representatives, right? Or representatives of choice. And that, of course, means electing more Latinos to be representative of those who serve us. But pre-clearance, quite frankly, is not there. We just have to work harder on the other. And, it used to be that pre-clearance kept us from having to litigate these cases as much as we do now, because the Department of Justice said no to redistricting. So got to go back to the drawing boards. Now we got to go to court to determine if they're going to be redrawn to meet the elements of the Voting Rights Act as well as the Redistricting Commission's creation.
And Danny, there were moments in which the jurisdiction that was looking to get pre-cleared, so in this instance, the Redistricting Commission would have to submit all public comments that were received. And then the Department of Justice would call people like you, interview you to say, is this factual? Is this, I mean, is this context correct? These interviews were held, I mean, were done by the Department of Justice and their Civil Rights Division. Can you explain a little bit what went on under these rules that were a part of pre-clearance?
Well, that's the leverage that I was talking about earlier. I'm glad you asked the question, because at the end of the day, if the community wasn't happy with the maps that were drawn for any particular reason, we really had access to the Department of Justice. They literally would come down and say, you know, what should we pre-clear this? They gave us another voice. The Redistricting Commission sits there and says, we have these elements to meet, whether it be competitives or whatever, and we're going to do our best to meet those. Now, clearly, there are always partisan, how to say, interests involved, right? And if we think that the Redistricting Commission was packed for one party or the other, and it was unfair to our community, we could literally talk to the Department of Justice and say, don't pre-clear this, because it's got a discriminatory effect in some form or fashion. Don't need to get very detailed about that. Particularly against communities of color. You know, one of the biggest benefactors of pre-clearance was the Native American community. Okay, I mean, and they held a hammer in that process like nobody else, greater than the Latino community, because a lot of the discrimination that made us a covered jurisdiction was because of the way the Native American community was treated, particularly on language issues. Okay, because remember, in order to be a covered jurisdiction like the state of Arizona was, you had to have some test or some device, okay, that was discriminatory at some point in time in your history. And clearly the Native American community had many tests and many devices that kept them from voting. And so at the end of the day, the Department of Justice and the way we used to use it effectively was that they would come down and talk to us, members of the community, and say, is this fair? Will this work? Will this, you know, protect you under the Voting Rights Act, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a very personal relationship. And guess what? The Redistricting Commission would never pass something that they thought the Department of Justice would thumb their nose at and say no, because we have enough testimony, we have enough people who participate in the redistricting process who talk to you about this, and you chose to ignore them. Not clear. Go back and redraw.
No. Thank you, Danny. And I open it up for everyone to, what recommendations do we have for us to give to best keep the commission accountable as it regards to the Voting Rights Act? Open it up.
Can I say, even though the clearance, the coverage formula was struck down by the Supreme Court, it doesn't prevent the Justice Department from creating a new standard that says, if you don't meet this standard, you are automatically going to be under greater scrutiny for any changes that you make. That does not, the Justice Department is not prevented from doing that. And so what we need to do, I mean, clearly it puts the onus and all the burden on us to be active within, to say, this is not fair. We need to file now, a lawsuit under this, but nothing prevents the Justice Department from saying ahead of time that if you don't clear this, we're automatically going to put this under scrutiny, and having the actions of us at the ground level, right? Kind of raising our voices anytime we see this. So Section 2 is still there, and that just requires us to be more active in bringing these lawsuits and bringing the attention of these issues to the Justice Department. And Biden, I think surprisingly to a lot of people, has been open to activists on the ground and to folks. He's been integrating a lot of these folks into his administration. My guess is if this is brought up to him, and I'm sure it already is, they'll be very responsive to this moving forward in the redistricting process.
The only thing that I would add is, Yes, we have that opportunity, but it really ends up in the courts in a much more different way than when we had preclearance, because we had many changes made before we had to go to the courts. And so it limited those issues that got there. And folks, litigation is extremely expensive. And the state can afford all the lawyers it needs and all the resources it has to be able to fight like hell in the courts. And that puts us at a disadvantage. I'm not disagreeing with what was said previously. I'm just saying it's a higher mountain to climb.
Victoria, what have you learned, like in talking to our community and leaders throughout the state? I mean, what recommendations are they given in order to engage the IRC in this process?
I mean, it really comes down to what Mr. Ortega and Dr. Nuno are saying, where we have to show up. I mean, the commission is reading these comments. They talk about it every meeting that they have. They talk about how many comments they've received. They don't talk about the content of them as much, and that's something that we still have to push them on, but they're seeing when people are speaking up. And so we need to be vigilant, and we need to keep submitting comment, even if it's just about letting them know that we're watching, even if it's about how much more they can be improving their communications, so that people are prepared that when we get to the public hearing stages, when we can actually talk about our communities of interest, when we can articulate what our communities are, then we're ready to take on that. The commission is accustomed to hearing from us. They're ready to take that input, and they're ready to fold it in, and they know that we're watching. I think because we're doing this virtually, especially, it can be very easy for the commission to feel like they're doing this work in a void, that nobody is listening to what they're doing. So the more that we submit comment, the more that we're able to at least send them an email and let them know that people are listening and that people are looking forward to these public hearings, then they know that the work that they're doing is very public, and they do owe it to the community, and that they do owe it to the state to be very public, transparent, and accessible to us as they go forth in really outlining what these communities of interest are.
Can I add something to that, Luis? I agree with everything that was just said, but come on, let's deal with the reality here. No Latino on the commission. The most qualified person to direct the commission on the staffing was denied the opportunity to do so, who happened to be Latina. And then most recently, they hired the people that were going to draw the maps that we also believe shouldn't have been hired. So our job is even bigger than we have ever imagined, without pre-clearance, without any fair representation on the commission, with having a map drawer that clearly is anti-Latino. We got to be there, and we got to repeat this over and over and over. You're stacked. There are partisan interests here. There's no question in our mind of what you're going to do and what the result is going to be. You got to be there and say it over and over and over by many different people from different jurisdictions, different places in the state.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sorry, and I just wanted to share something that Victoria was sharing with me, that there's no other place to like add public comments either, other than those Tuesday hearings. So we're limited in our ability to say and react to things when it comes to like a public record. And even more reason to like push on this. And that's a lot of pressure on us as community groups to ensure that this is done right.
Thank you, Montse. And that was brought up, that the limited factor right now, as hearings are being conducted and the IRC is going through business, that we really need to train our leaders and community members to participate in these forums that are limited, but we need to figure out ways that we get in a forum like this is also a part of that, educating people, just bringing people into the conversation. Redistricting is a very complex thing, but I go back to our role as leaders in this space is to really try to make things as simple as possible, to give power to people, to act in that power and really represent a lot of the concerns that are currently going on. And Mr. Ortega, like always, cited the obvious, and we do have now a couple of decisions that the Redistricting Commission has made that are really concerning to a lot of folks in this call and on the Zoom, but also as an ability that we want to see the proof is in the pudding in actions that are going to be taken. So we sure hope that we take public comment as a much more stringent criteria for them to implement. So it can't just be these hearings and them, I mean, they need to facilitate a function for public comment. So that's a great recommendation out of this process. Let me open it up to a question that we did receive as folks were registering. So thank you, Ms. Granillo, who presented this question, is how can members of the public contribute to efforts to protect our rights in the redistricting process? Advocacy, financial support, or so on. Let me start with Monse. I mean, how can someone take action?
Yeah, I mean, definitely through organizations involved at One Arizona, there's a little something for everyone at the table through your political party as well. You know, we know that folks are engaged at the table. We are meeting regularly and getting information to our partners regularly through Victoria, and are making it as simple as possible for our groups to inform their organization's team how to be involved and make comments. Again, a lot of the organizations do have an active organizer or are looking to hire one, so there'll be a dedicated person. If this is something that you know you maybe want to engage with Chispan and they're doing environmental justice, but you're just focus on redistricting, you can do that directly with an organizer.
Thank you. And yeah, and it was presented, the reality is when you are able to submit comments, but it's public comments are only part of the record if they're submitted during the hearing itself. So,
yeah, there's no emails on the website. You know, I think the staff isn't listed. So those are things that we're pushing for to make it a lot simpler to submit comments that are visible not only to them, but to the general public.
I saw a light bulb clear up with Danny on this one.
Yeah, me too. It's because we're matching.
Professor, are there in your research in the redistricting process, what have you seen communities, either maybe in California or in Texas, how have folks how have they been able to be effective in this process?
I think there's three ways, three general ways, and it really is not directly tied to redistricting, but really tied to who gets to make the rules of redistricting. And we're constantly playing catch up when it comes to, you know, every redistricting, when it comes to elections. The 2022 governor's election is being won today. It's not going to be won next year. The census battle, that battle was won in 2016, right? And so we're constantly looking at problems in the rearview mirror and trying to adjust our driving in the, you know, by looking at the rearview mirror, and we can't do that. And a lot of that has to do with our relationship with the Democratic Party and integrating Latinos into the party making decisions, not just saying, well, we want to do this and do that, and therefore Latinos should vote for us. That can't be the future of the Democratic Party. The Latinos have to be integrated into the party. And when we look at California and how Latinos have been integrated into the Democratic Party in California, we can see that much of the decision-making processes integrate Latino interests into the decision-making process as well. Three ways to do that. Number one, automatic voter registration, registering everybody to vote. And like Mr. Ortega said, Democrats don't necessarily want everybody to vote, right? And so when you have a safe district, why do you want more people to vote when you have a safe district and you're a Democrat? So getting everyone to vote and forcing the Democratic Party to listen to Latinos because everyone is registered to vote. Number two, ranked voter choice, having systems of election processes that integrate greater participation and power in Latinos when they decide on who they want to vote. And when people run for offices, they know they have to listen to Latinos. Ranked voter choice does that. Also, single member districts at the city level. having district voting at the city level where more Latinos can now participate and have a chance at winning local elections also will filter up in the decision-making process. When more Latinos are elected at the local level, the party will have to listen to more Latino interests, and that will filter up throughout the party. Once you got that, now you have all of a sudden a system that's going to pay more or closer to attention to Latinos in all of the decision-making processes, including census, which was horrible, and including the redistricting process.
No, and you bring up a great point. Redistricting, I know we're talking about state redistricting with congressional maps and the state legislative maps, but there will be redistricting being considered for counties, the school districts that are in districts like Phoenix Union District, districts that even fire districts and irrigation districts and other Maricopa County Community College, for example, are ones that we don't necessarily pay attention to, but are extremely important for our community. So it is really a call to get engaged at the local level and also advocate at the state level, like what we say with politics. I think all politics is local, and we have to engage at all levels, and our community is asking for that advocacy. I want to point out there was a question from the participants about what if, because Arizona did not receive an additional congressional seat, what if the Redistricting Commission submits the maps as they are right now? Would they pass pre-clearance in your opinion? And I think that's a question for Danny or Professor.
Yeah, well, then, let me just deal with it generally. I mean, things have changed in 10 years. You can't take the same lines and expect that the demographics are going to be the same, the statistics will be the same. And so clearly, if they propose no changes, it's going to be ripe for challenge. So at the end of the day, I believe that they're going to have to make changes because there have been shifts in population. There's been growth, though growth has been stagnated somewhat. But so my answer is that would be the biggest mistake they could possibly make, on top of who they hired for director, on top of who they hired for doing the maps, on top of the fact that we don't have a representative there. Bring it on.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. And it point out, like, there was a hypothetical question. I got corrected that we don't have pre-clearance, and in these spaces, sometimes people want to be very very crystal clear. And it was a hypothetical question on this. So just want to make that it. And there are efforts to try to what Professor Nuno mentioned, is that the Department of Justice could apply some more stringent observations and take action when necessary, as the Civil Rights Division has often done in a number of cases, that they've taken actions directly. They did so in SB 1070, for example. The Department of Justice took federal action, and they can also do it on maps that are not meeting the intent of the Voting Rights Act, either Section 2 or Section 5. Let's not forget, though that Section 5 has been, there are still case law and understanding of what the power of Section 2 is under the Voting Rights Act to take if there has been the dilution of the communities of interest and their power of electing one of their own, or interests that are not being paid attention to. And so that is certainly a part of this. I want to open it up. We're running in the next, we got 10 more minutes. I want to kind of open it up for folks to discuss other items they would like to present to the group that is assembled today. Any parting thoughts?
I have to leave. Can I just say again? I don't mean to jump on a Democratic Party thing and just be negative about the Democrats, but today in 2020, everyone knows who the Tea Party was, right? They no longer exist. And the reason why the Tea Party no longer exists is because the Republican Party integrated them into the party. Latinos as a political entity still exists and will continue to exist until the Democrats integrate Latinos into the party. And Democrats can take a lesson from how the Republicans have used the power of the Tea Party movement to also use the power of Latinos advocating for themselves, and the many civic organizations that still are reaching in. So we can call it outreach, but we call it in reach, of Latinos trying to reach into the Democratic Party, asking for advocacy. And when we think about in 2016, another thing in NBC, when I was working for NBC News, I called Adrian Fontes' election in 2016 the most important election that nobody heard about. And the support for a person like Adrian Fontes, who took registration seriously, and took voting seriously, and took Latino voters seriously, the support that he got from the Democratic Party, even though, was paltry, and he lost the election, and we lost a massive opportunity. Where you talk about the Gallegos, who really are in the fastest growing part of Arizona, the fastest growing part of one of the fastest growing states in the union, and there's two people named Gallego who are in charge of these districts, right? And so, if the party is going to support these, they should support these folks in the registration process, and this can really help with the power structure in Arizona. But we have to integrate the voices that we see here into the party, into actual policy. And until we do that, and I know it is happening, but until we do that, we're still going to be driving, looking at the rearview mirror.
Yeah. And an important piece of this conversation is, the Democratic Party is far from perfect, and it has a lot of lessons, either history lessons or reality at this present time. My message to a lot of folks on this call has always, the party is you. The party is you fighting for, it is a very frustrating organization because it is built in rules that were created in the progressive era of 100 years ago. And so we have structural problems in trying to get our representation, but we have to reform those and move them. But we do need people to, sometimes we walk into the room and it's the same people that are creating these barriers. It's important for us to remain in the room and fight and really make our message here. And it's not easy. Danny has been a part of a lot of conversations where our biggest enemy is the Democratic Party's inability to understand. And he made his comment is like, it's always pushed, if Latinos would only vote. Well, we need to give people a reason to vote for Democrats. We need to give reason for Latinos to understand that the party is not perfect, but is a representative of their best interests. And redistricting is a part of that because it's representation to the highest degree. Any other comments?
Well, I just want to say that, first of all, I enjoyed this. I think it's a great forum. I think we need to have more of these in our community with more people involved, given the situation that we're in. And to the degree that we continue, rallying the troops out there to get active in this process, it is key. No, the impact of preclearance isn't there. The lack of representation is horrible. I mean, you're basically up against a very, very tough situation. The more you do of this in different venues with different people at different times, I think the more effective we're going to be. Because at the end of the day, all of us want the same thing, fair representation, and more importantly, that our people get out to vote. And the blocks and the walls that are built, no pun intended, that are built, to keep us from doing that is what we have to continue to fight. It's like somebody says, Danny, I'm going to show up no redistricting commission. I'm going to go out and register people to vote. Well, we can all do our part, and the redistricting commission has got to be a part of it.
Monte, any parting words?
I'll let Victoria go first since I need to catch up a little bit.
I mean, I just can't emphasize enough reaching out to the commission, submitting comment, sending emails to them, doing what you can to show them that you're listening. It's so easy for them to make the decisions that they're making and avoid, for them to think that they're not having an impact, for them to think that they can make decisions that don't actually address the issues that the Latino community is facing or other communities of color are facing in this state. So let them know that you're listening, let them know that you're watching, and let them know that we will push back if they continue to make decisions that impact Latino voters and just the Latino community at large in the state.
Hey, Luis, I think the other thing that's important is that, look, we've got an administration that's sensitive to the community. We have two Democratic senators, and we have a host of congressmen from the Latino community. I think we have a stage that we can play on, depending on where they go and what they do, both at the federal and the local level. So let's take advantage of that. We're not operating under a Trump administration, though the remnants of it are still there. At the end of the day, we do have that leverage, that political leverage, and we got to put these folks to a test, about where they're at with our community, where they're at, where these lines are going to be drawn. I mean, there's a test here for the two U.S. senators and congressmen to step forward, not necessarily to protect their own interests. And I say that more for the congressmen than I do for the U.S. senators. But at the end of the day, that's the other place that we have to look at and say, how can we leverage that? The current administration and where we're at in Arizona.
No, thank you, Danny. And it is timely, and it is necessary for us to engage at all levels. Sometimes members of our own family are ones that need the hardest persuasion and the hardest reality call. We do it for the people that we all represent. I do it for my mother that woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning to work out in the fields. And we do it for people that are retiring and they don't have enough for a roof over their head and food on their table. We do it because we know that we need to work extremely hard at all levels. We have to be at a constant state of negotiation at all levels for us to kind of advance this. And it's also a reality. Redistricting is among the most extremely most difficult because it is personal at all levels, and it is about power at all levels, and it is about one little move in one area has a ripple effect everywhere else. And so we always have to understand the bigger picture in this scenario, and we need to work really hard. Redistricting is an opportunity for us to resettle the maps every 10 years. And also to give and there is an increasing voice of Latino leadership. There is an increasing voice of Latino power in the state, and we could negotiate with these interests, but we need to make sure that they're grounded on those interests that represent the people that put them in power. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of work to be done. Again, there is the opportunity to engage with groups like One Arizona, the opportunity to engage with the party, the opportunity to engage with MALDEF and other groups. Got to do all the above in this work. And so we appreciate everyone's time. We're running into our 1 hour mark, and I really want to thank all of our panelists being a part of this conversation. Our contact informations are available. Please reach out to your confirmation email if you have any follow-up or anything else that you would want us to follow up on. This is a great venue for us to continue the hard work of doing what is best for everyone that we represent. So gracias. Have the rest of your Good Friday and your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.